Living in a small space is something many of us are going to do at some point in our lives, whether it be our first apartment or even later in life when we're downsizing. And in some parts of the world, small space living is really just a regular part of life for most people. Or maybe you don't live in a smaller home, but you have a small space within your home that needs to function more efficiently. Whatever the scenario, small space living can be a challenge, but it also has its benefits. Smaller homes tend to just have a coziness about them that you really can't duplicate in a McMansion. There's also going to be less for you to clean and maintain. And when it comes to furniture and decor, you're probably going to save yourself some money because less space to fill means buying less stuff to fill it. Not to mention the fact that smaller, more condensed housing reduces urban sprawl. So could we just do away with this whole idea that bigger is always better? Small can be great. In this video, I'm going to share with you my best tips for making the most of a small space. And I'm also going to show you some images of small interiors that have been really well designed. So whether it be a studio apartment or a spare room that needs to serve multiple functions, I've got you covered. Let's get right into it. When it comes to designing a small space, it's really crucial that you make good use of every square foot that you've got. And this comes down to smart planning. You want to find the best, most functional layout that you can. This process means getting really honest with yourself about how you need your home to function. If you know that you're never going to throw a dinner party, does it really make a lot of sense to devote much real estate to a large dining table? And if you're much more inclined to work from your laptop on your sofa, maybe having a home office isn't the best use of your space. Plan your home to suit your lifestyle. Don't try to change your lifestyle to suit your home. Now, you may want to get a little bit creative with your layout. So I did some searching on Pinterest and I found some great examples of ways that you can use built-ins in a small space. If you have a little spot like this, I love the idea of turning it into a sleeping alcove. It's a really efficient use of space, plus having the drawers underneath is super practical. This is a great spot to store extra bedding if you don't have a linen closet. This is another great example of how you can separate your sleeping area from the rest of the living space if you don't have a full bedroom. Doesn't this just look so cozy? I feel like this would be really conducive to a good night's sleep. Creating separate zones can really help to define the different functions of a small space. If you have an open plan and no opportunity to add walls, try using dividing screens, curtains, or shelving units to provide separation. I also found some great examples of built-in banquettes. This one is really smart because it continues on further into the space to act as a sort of TV bench. And it's providing lots of storage in that you have those drawers below the banquette and doors below the TV. Banquettes are also excellent space savers because they allow you to place your table closer to the wall since you don't need extra clearance for pulling chairs in and out. And here's one I found to be quite an original idea. The kitchen's been raised slightly so that there's space to add a trundle bed underneath. Very clever use of space. In a small space, picking the right furniture is key. Now, when it comes to the size and scale of furniture, don't get too hung up on this idea that a small room needs small furniture. That can actually have the opposite effect of what you're trying to achieve and make that small space feel even smaller. Of course, you can't go so oversized that the pieces don't properly fit, but what you want to aim for is furniture that's going to adequately fill the space while still allowing for enough breathing room and clear traffic patterns. Furniture that can accommodate multiple functions, also going to be really helpful in a small space. If you don't have room for a separate dining table, maybe look into one of these coffee tables that raises up to dining height. Or if you need your home office to double as a guest room, maybe consider a day bed that doubles as a real bed. When it comes to space-saving convertible furniture, there's of course the Murphy bed. And if you've been in the market for a Murphy bed recently, you'll know that the designs have really come a long way. They're much more functional and stylish now than they used to be. And there are also options out there for occasional furniture that can be easily stored when it's not in use. So this is a photo of my old condo. Now, keep in mind that I decorated this place like 15 years ago, so some styles have probably changed a bit, but I have to say, I think that this holds up not too badly. Now, it was 700 square feet, this condo, and I don't know, some people might find that roomy, some people might see that as being small. I found that for me as a single person, it was plenty of space. Really, the only challenge that I had was that there wasn't a lot of room for a dining table. Now, I didn't host all that often, so this really was only an occasional problem. And the way that I resolved this was by purchasing this little IKEA dining table that had a couple of sliding leaves. So when it wasn't in use, I was able to condense it and easily push it back against the wall. Now, if I needed any more dining chairs, I had a couple extra that I stored in here. So this was my spare bedroom slash home office slash craft room, and I kept my dining chairs up on the wall out of the way. If you're at all familiar with the Shakers and their like wall hook system, you may know that this was a way that they would store chairs, and this is just kind of my modern interpretation of that. Now, you could of course do something like this with a folding chair, and then it would take up even less room. Don't forget about vertical space in your planning. Adding interest to your walls is going to draw your eye upward and around the room, and it's going to give the impression that the space is actually larger than it is. But in addition to art or wall decor, you can also take advantage of vertical height as functional space. Shelving, of course, one really obvious solution. I really like what they've done here with shelving. There's the deeper bottom shelf that acts like a desktop, and then they've also extended the top shelf and suspended it from the ceiling. A really interesting and effective way of using what would have otherwise been empty and wasted space. Wall cabinets are another great way to take advantage of vertical space. And yes, you can use enclosed cabinetry like this in other rooms besides the kitchen. Now, one of the ways we may be most familiar with this concept of using vertical space is loft beds. IKEA, of course, carries a bunch of these. But I recognize that if you are a full-grown adult human, that these are not really intended for you. But there are more adult-appropriate versions of the loft bed. And rather than having to scale an awkward ladder, the steps that they've used here are really smart because these double as drawers for lots of additional storage space. Perhaps the most challenging aspect of small space living is lack of storage. So whatever you can do to maximize storage space is going to be really important. We've already looked at a couple of different options for storage ideas, but there are lots of others, so let's take a closer look. I love the sleek and modern versions of pegboards that we have seen popping up everywhere. These are so easily adaptable, they could work in a variety of spaces to suit a variety of functions. If you're on a tighter budget, I do think that IKEA's versions of these are actually really great, but some of the larger, more custom options are very cool. Just another great way to make use of your wall space. I am also a fan of a narrow shoe cabinet, anything that stores your shoes on an angle so that they take up less depth. I've been using those stall shoe cabinets from IKEA for ages. I think they're great in a narrow front entry, but there are tons of different options out there. Back of the door storage is another great space-saving option. These can really go in a variety of spaces, but I think they're especially good for bathrooms or for closets. I actually have one of these over-the-door shoe holders on the back of my pantry door, and I use it to store spices and other small stuff. I also store some spices in magnetic spice jars on the front of my pantry door. So our kitchen is definitely on the smaller side. Storage is always an issue, and we have a very plain, basic pantry door, and I wanted to just come up with some sort of a DIY that would allow me to make use of that wasted space. It was a pretty easy, straightforward project to take on, and if any of you are curious about how I went about it, I'm just gonna go ahead and tell you right now. I bought 6 of these 12 by 18 inch 26 gauge steel sheets, and I covered each of them in peel and stick chalkboard vinyl. So not only are these panels magnetic, but they can also function as chalkboard. I then used some Gorilla Tape on the back just to tape all of the panels together. I also purchased this narrow white vinyl tape that I used to make this sort of line pattern, and really the purpose in that was just to sort of camouflage the seams in between each panel. I just put a bunch of alien tape strips on the back of each panel to attach it to the door, and it's been up for several months now, and it seems to be holding up really well. So we've already touched on the idea of shelving to make use of vertical space, but one really smart shelving idea I think is great for a small space is a shelf above a door. When you need all the space you can get, this is just a really clever way of making it all count. Furniture with storage is also going to be your friend in a small space. This IKEA Tonestad coffee table has 2 drawers, which is a great option for added storage. Going back to the idea of built-in storage, I came across this image, and I just think that this is a brilliant idea to make really good use of any extra space you've got in a bathroom, for sure, but I also think you could do something like this in a kitchen, like maybe if you had a little bit of space beside your fridge, for example. Or maybe it's even just a portable unit on casters like this one that wouldn't even require that it be built in. And if you're lacking in closet space, wall hooks are another great space-saving option. I love some cool decorative hooks in a front entry or in a bathroom. You can actually even make your own decorative wall hooks just using cabinet knobs. All you need are some hanger bolts. So the way that these work, one of the ends is threaded so that it will fit into the cabinet knob, and the threading on the other end is like a screw, so you can use it with a drywall anchor and attach it to your wall. Color. Color is definitely a design element that can have a big impact on a small space. Now, the recommendation often tends to be that if you want a small space to feel larger, that you should keep the colors really light. And in a lot of cases, this is very true, but I don't necessarily agree that this is always the best solution in every scenario. If you live in a small studio apartment, then yeah, I'm typically going to agree that light neutral walls is the way to go. It's going to give you a blank canvas that's easy to work with, and if you're spending prolonged periods of time in that one space for a variety of activities and functions, it makes sense that you want it to be light and bright. If, however, your small space is one contained room within a larger home, I think you have much more flexibility when it comes to color. Powder rooms, great example of this. Now, I know I've talked about this before, but powder rooms are a great opportunity to experiment with bolder or darker colors. They're fully contained, so it has very little impact on the rest of the home, and you're spending pretty brief amounts of time in that room, so it's also pretty low risk. Small bedrooms are also places you can be a little more adventurous with color. Embrace the smallness and do something that feels really warm and cozy. Color drench that room in a hue that you really love and just let it fully envelop you. Lighting is always an important consideration in any interior, and small spaces are no exception. Now, if you're lucky enough to have big windows and lots of natural light, this can have a huge impact on how large the space is going to feel. If you aren't so lucky, you might want to consider incorporating some mirrors into your space. By placing them on the walls that are opposite what windows you do have, they can just help to add to the feeling of openness and also help reflect and bounce the natural light around the space. You're also going to want to incorporate lots of artificial light sources. So you can do this through the use of lots of lamps, and if you can, even some wall sconces. Those are just going to help you hit those different heights with your lighting. And yes, you're probably going to want ample overhead lighting as well, just to help emulate the feeling of natural light during the day. At night, you can dim everything down and use those lamps to achieve those cozy vibes that small spaces are so good for. All right, my friends, those are all my best interior design tips for small spaces. Maybe if you were someone who is feeling a little apprehensive about small interiors, perhaps I've even been able to change your mind a little bit. I thank you so much for being here. I hope we see you again at the next one, and bye for now.